Hello and welcome to what will be hopefully a very short video. What we're going to look at in this video is the project that you have due in for me. So we have to make a walk cycle with a character in it, but as part of the same project you have to render out a still image. So we're just going to look at that kind of component, making an environment and rendering out a still image of the character with appropriate lighting, etc. So to do that, I'm just going to take my environment and delete it and start from scratch. Now, what we completed in class was a character walking on the spot. We made a walk cycle, so this character actually walks forward. So what I did was, on frame 1, if I go into pose mode here, I just put my 3D cursor here at the side, and I moved this to frame my next keyframe, and I just took everything, so I hit A, and I went G and moved forward on Y until the toe was in line with this marker here, and then I recorded that keyframe. I did the same here, just to make sure that this toe stayed with the keyframe, and then once I got to the middle one, I shifted to here, and then moved and moved again. So those kind of 5 small moves just to ensure the character actually advanced and went forward. But what we're primarily going to look in this is just a very, very quick kind of setup for lighting and environment. So the lighting we'll get to in a minute. So let's build the environment as I had it there. So I was going to add very quickly add a plane. I'm going to go into edit mode and I'm going to go GX1, and I'm going to add a mirror modifier. We have a plane either side, and then I'm going to add an array modifier. Now this array modifier is going off on X, so I'm just going to rotate minus 90 degrees. Actually, let me do that again. Let's start again. Sorry, let's delete that. So we're going to add our plane. And let's add the array modifier now, and then we'll rotate this minus 90 degrees on Z. So we go or minus 90, so then the array modifier is going to go back on Y. Now we're going to take this and go GX1, and then we'll add our mirror modifier. Now I could have done it the other way as well, but now this is a mirror modifier on X, so I'm going to turn that off and put it on Y. So now I'm going to make a small step. I'm going to go EZ and then EX, and then the rest is just, by eye. So maybe we'll make this time a sort of a small corridor or something. So it's going to hit G, E, and this is all just sort of to make things look a little bit better. I'm going to turn on clipping on my mirror modifier and then go EX, and that is my environment. Now, what I'm going to do with that is I'm going to, first of all, I'm going to add a material. So I'm going to add, I have one here called floor. So let's have a very quick look at this. Now this is Blender 2.79, so that means that I have in here the principal shader. I think we were working earlier today in a room with Blender 2.77 and it didn't have that. Anyway, here we go. So this is just I've just changed the base color and left everything else exactly the same. So that's floor. I'm going to take this face here in face select mode and go E, escape, and S, scale it down, and I'm going to add another material layer, and we'll add in light. And the light, as you can see here, is simply an emission shader plugged into our material output, and then I need to assign that. Now if I go to materials, you'll see that that has been assigned. Now I should probably do something similar up here, so I'll take that and I'll go E, escape, and then S, Z. And we'll make sort of a blue stripe along the wall. And yeah, that's enough for now. maybe take, no, we'll leave it as it is there. We'll see what we get. Okay, so now in our, go back to our modifiers. In our array modifier, we'll just send this back, and we'll say send it back 20 times or 30 times. And now let's look through our camera. Now I'm going to reposition this, so I'm going to click on lock camera to view, which is there, and then select the camera and then position it. Okay. Now I'm going to go back to change my node editor to being my timeline, and actually I have, what have I done here? The camera has an animation on it, so we'll just delete that animation. So I'll go to my dope sheet, there are the keyframes for the character animation. This is the animation on the camera, so let's just delete that and go back to my 3D view. Camera, or lock camera view is turned on, so let's just reposition this. We'll hit OR, just rotate this a fraction, and then we'll go to render view. So there is our character there. Now we've one additional sort of setting here that we'll look at in a moment, which is our depth of field. But before we do that, let's have a look. We have another light here, which is sort of lighting down. So I'm going to rotate that so it's kind of pointing down the corridor. And we'll have a very quick look at the nodes for that. And again, it's sort of a very light blue and kind of a lowish strength. So if I look through the camera and set up my render, yeah, we have a much better sort of view of what's going on. Now, the camera selected, and we go into camera, the camera properties. It's going to set up the depth of field for this camera. So I get to pick what's this, the point of focus. Now in this instance, it makes sense for the character to be in focus, but I could actually have an object that moved and have things move in and out of focus. I could make the lamp, for example, the center of our focus, in which case then the character and everything else down there will be way out of focus, as you can see in our viewport. So we go back to the character, and then the amount of blur that we get is set by this setting here, so size. So if I put it in at a setting of say 4, we'll get a huge sort of loss of focus. Now if I put it in at say 0.05, we'll see that it's quite subtle. It's kind of soft focus down around the back here, but there's quite a large area that's in focus. So we'll leave it at a value like that. So I'm just going to save that. So that's basically our environment made and our lighting done. So we've only one light. We have one other small item to look at. If I look at my nodes here, by default you sit here on object. So if I select an object here, we'll see the nodes on that object. But if I click this little tab here beside it, I have background, and by default the background's actually white. So this is what you would have by default, and you can see the background here is out of focus. And you may want that kind of look. You may want a very white world. So I could select my my plane here and go to its settings, go to the floor, and if I go back to object here, I could make this quite white and have a completely different look or a completely different feel to this image. But I'm going to not do that. I'm going to make this quite dark, and then I'm going to go back to my world settings, make that black as if we were out in space, and I'm just going to render this image. So the last thing we're going to look at is render settings before we render the image and finish up. So first of all, you should check that your user preferences, and you should check your system information, and then over here a thing called CUDA. So basically this turns on and off your graphics card. And as you can see here, I've got a NVIDIA GTX 760. So by default this is set to none, in which case if you look over here you'll be on CPU rendering, which just takes much longer. So what you want to be on, if you can, is CUDA, and then after you've turned that on, you don't have to tick anything. Over here you should set this to GPU compute. Now if you're on a laptop or something, you may not have the option to do that, in which case you're just on CPU rendering. By default the image should be HD, but it's normally set to 50% here, so set that to 100. We can set our output destination, and for what we're going to do now is to render one frame. We should be on PNG. The sampling here is the quality of the finished image. So if I kind of increase that to say 500, that's the number of times it looks at each pixel and to kind of figure out what each pixel should be. So it ends up basically it's a quality setting, and the higher the number the better the quality, but also the higher the number the slower the render. So we're going to leave it at 100. By default when you launch Blender it's on 128, so this is just slightly lower quality than the default render. And then finally what we're going to do is we're going to look here at performance, and this is these two numbers here, 512, 512, they normally default to 64 and 64. And when we press render, you'll see small squares rendering each kind of part of the image. And these two numbers determine the size of those squares, those kind of bytes of the render. Now if we make them too big, we'll run out of RAM. So there's only 2 gig of RAM on this graphics card. And if we make them too small, well, they'll still work, but it'll just take longer. So you're trying to find the optimum size. You may want to make them as big as possible without running out of RAM. So I'm going to set mine to 512 by 512, and then I'm going to hit the render button. And this is basically what we did in class today. So hopefully this will all make sense. And you can see as it goes through the sample, so it has 100 to do, so it's going 21, 27, etc. So it's going to render them. So I'm on frame number 6. The main part of the exercise you have to do for me is make me a 50 frame walk cycle. So 50 individual images. So the next number across here is the time. So we're 30 seconds in. So if each frame, let's guess that this takes 2 minutes to render. If each frame takes 2 minutes and you have to do 50 of them, that's 100 minutes. So you've got an hour and a half long render. At which point you need to maybe think about lowering the quality, so from 100 samples maybe down to 50, or changing some other settings to try and increase either your performance or decrease the render time by maybe making the resolution lower. And all we can do now is sit and wait. We looked at that setting for how large each rendered frame would be, so that each one of these is 512 by 512, and for that to be most effective it needs to be to the power of 2, because that's how graphics cards work. So like I said, by default it's 64 by 64. If we could make it bigger, this render would be faster. But and if we look here, my peak RAM is actually only 40 meg of RAM, so I could actually up the size of this render area. It would increase the speed of the render, and I would have no fear of running out of RAM. That would be one way to speed up the process. So we're nearly there, and we're 2 minutes into the render time. And you will see, depending on the complexity of each kind of component of the render, that some areas of the image will render much faster than others. So yeah, there we go. So this is the last frame rendering here. So when it's finished, we're just going to go down to image, and we're going to go literally save image. And then so what you have to submit to me is a short film, a short movie, which is literally 2 seconds long, of the character walking. And also a small write-up on how you made your character and your scene, how you lit it and animated it, and then something just like this, a still image. So we'll go image, save as image, I'll go into my desktop and I'll call it walk, and this will be saved as a PNG file. So let's minimize this, and there it is there, and it has opened on my second monitor, so I'll just bring that across. So that's the finished rendered file there. Okay, so that's enough for now. So like I said, this is just a very brief kind of copy of what we did in class and part of what you have to do for your project for me.